Hey kids, it's Chef Jack here with another batch of independent comic book reviews in the hopes of giving you, and us, let's be honest, a break from the absolute disaster that's been Marvel Comics lately. So, without further ado, let's get this train a-rolling, shall we? The one-star books. These are the worst. Not merely bad, but awful and horrendous. Avoid them at all costs. Dragon Age Knight Errant 3. You know, for an issue that's supposedly about infiltrating a castle and then staging a jailbreak, with all the implied heroics that are supposed to go with such a story, this issue is just boring, folks. And by boring, I mean it's sleep-inducing. There's too much dialogue and it bogs down the story. It's all tell, it's not a lot of show, and when it does show, the images are lifeless and they're static. Don't get me wrong, the actual quality of the art is great. It's just the dynamics displayed in it match the overstuffed, boring story. The entire thing feels like it's 70 pages long instead of only 23. It was a slog. Seriously, I had to work to read at it, and I almost didn't finish it. So unless you're a huge fan of the Dragon Age video game, and you absolutely must have everything associated with that video game, I wouldn't bother with the comic book. I mean, unless you need some help getting to sleep at night, of course, in which case, go right ahead. The two-star books. These comics might be bad, but there's usually one or two things that save them from being truly horrible. Excel number 2. Danny seeks out a lonely, wide-open space where he can simultaneously do some personal soul-searching, and he can also really open up and see just how fast he can move when he wants to. This story is trying far too hard to be profound. I think what the writer was going for here was to express what the human mind might actually experience when it's moving at a relativistic speed, but in the end it just comes down to being confusing, especially once the Seneca tribal mysticism is thrown into the mix. In addition to the confusing story, the art in this issue is just off somehow. None of the human characters actually look human. They're too attenuated and skinny. The choices of point of view leave a lot to be desired as well. Some of the images can only be described as bizarre because of it. And on top of it all, the writer uses ninja as an adjective, which is just wrong. Everybody knows you only ever use ninja as either a noun or as a verb. The three-star books. These comics are just average. They fall neither on the good end of the spectrum nor the bad. The Micronauts. Wrath of Karza number 3. Where to start? You know, along with the first two issues in this series, Micronauts number 3 is slowly convincing me that the overall goal of the producers of this comic is to just bore us to death. There's nothing exciting in the dialogue or the plot, and the art is purely pedestrian. I mean, sure, there are some flashy splash pages and some interesting imagery in the artwork here and there, and there's one or two moments where the dialogue is pretty catchy, but most of it is just stock. It's everything we've seen before. And in some cases, it's just cliched. What characterization exists is flat and lifeless. It's difficult to root for heroes who just aren't that heroic. They seem more cardboard cutout than anything else. That said, there's nothing here to absolutely hate about the book. I mean, the story is boring, sure, but it's not horrible. And the art meets minimum standards at least. So in the end, I can't recommend it, but I also can't warn you away from it. Sons of Anarchy, Redword Original number 12. Jax is captured by a rival gang and has to fight his way through to freedom. This issue makes use of some very interesting page composition, not to mention entire pages go by without any sort of dialogue at all except sound effects notation. And it tells an interesting story, and a really gripping action story at that. Thing is, the moment that the plot moves away from the action elements and goes into the interpersonal stuff at the end, which is the bit where Jax is back in civilization, he's at the hospital, and the police are going to be investigating, and they're trying to cover it all up, and, well, things just fall apart at that point. What was once an interesting action sequence becomes overdone and absolutely dependent on the reader's familiarity with the television series on which this series is based. So, pick it up if you're a fan of the series, but if you've never seen the TV show Sons of Anarchy, I wouldn't bother with it because you'll just end up being confused. The 4-star books. Now we're getting to the good stuff. These are the comics we can actually recommend. Real Science Adventures number 4. As always with Real Science Adventures, this issue is a 2-story anthology. The first story, The Flying She-Devils Raid on Marauder Island Part 4, is filled with fast-moving, exciting, edge-of-your-seat action and a story involving brave heroes fighting dastardly sky pirates. The second story, The Sparrow Project Millipede Part 4, is a tale of espionage and intrigue in Nazi-occupied Europe. Both stories are incredible. They're just fun, especially if you're a fan of the old pulp adventures, which I am, by the way. The issues just all go no quit, with very few slow moments getting in the way of the action. My only real complaint is the skill level of the artist. I mean, seriously, I think art is stuff I can't do, but I can do this stuff. Otherwise, this would probably be a perfect issue for me. Van Helsing number 6. Van Helsing versus the Mummy of Amun-Ra. Laszlo Van Helsing finally confronts the mummy, who's been living as an immortal cult leader and a behind-the-scenes political manipulator. Folks, this is just a fun story. There's a lot of cool pseudo-steampunk action mixed up with modern-day sensibilities in this issue. The plots are a little melodramatic, but it's not unrealistic, or at least not as unrealistic than a comic about a monster hunter normally is. Once again, the problems are minor. The writer insists on using ancestors when he means descendants, for example, and the artist can only draw 3 or 4 human faces and then shares them out with every single character. But these are all quibbles compared to the excellence of the rest of the story. It's just a really fun, exciting issue, and I can't wait for the next one. The 5-star books. These books are the best of the best, at least for this week. These are the ones that we recommend the most. The Dresden Files, number 2. Continuing the Dogmen story. Harry, Joseph, and Mouse, who is not the big friendly sheepdog he is disguised as, travel to the small town of Taylor, Mississippi to investigate the murder of a backwoods family in an area known to be the home of several tribes of werewolves. I gotta say, as a fan of the book series on which this comic is based, I liked this issue a lot. I mean, despite it being original to the comic series, the tone and the voice of the story was just true to the books in a way that a lot of comic book versions aren't. The characterization was spot on. The plot was compelling and was just complex enough to be enjoyable. The art in this issue fit the story also, and there was just enough action to keep one interested. Overall, this was an excellent read. Killer Be Killed number 10. Dylan lays low while the police investigate the double murder of the Russian hitman Bogdan Blomsky and Dylan's drug dealer friend Rex. And while he does lay low, several old friends and lovers jump back into his life just at the time he doesn't want them there. I gotta say, folks, this story is just getting better and more complex as it goes along. The best thing about the book is the characterization, especially of Dylan, our protagonist. I mean, has he really made a deal with a demon? Has he just gone crazy? Is he hallucinating everything? You know what? We, the audience, still don't know. And to me, that's just fine. In addition to the story, the art here is just amazing. It fits the story like a glove. The plot has all the perfect pacing of a Guy Ritchie movie. It's just a wonderful book, and especially if you're a fan of crime thrillers. If you are, you're just going to love it. Regression number 3. I want to start off by saying that this book absolutely blew my mind. It's not only an absolutely beautiful book. I mean, take a look at this artwork, boys and girls. Isn't this fantastic? It's not just a beautiful book, as I was saying, but the story is dense, and it's thick, and it's involving. I mean, there's a question. Is there something really supernatural going on that is causing people to die? Or is Adrian just a psychopath who's hallucinating the whole thing while he's acting like a serial killer? With this issue, the art style is the high point here. It feels like a more modern interpretation of what we normally think of as Gothic horror artwork. It's an explicit story, it's scary in spots, and you are going to be left wanting a lot more. So I cannot recommend this book enough. Go out, find it, read it, enjoy it. Trust me, you're going to. So there you go, boys and girls. Another batch of independent comics for your reading enjoyment. What did you think? Have you read any of the comics I just reviewed? If so, do you agree with me or disagree? And if you do disagree, why do you disagree? Now, are there any comics here that you weren't interested in but are interested in now? Are there any comics here that make you think that even the independent producers can be just as bad as Marvel? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, if you like what you see in this video, click like or maybe even share this video with your friends. If you want to see more from us, go ahead and click subscribe and that little notification bell in the corner. And lastly, if you think we're doing a really good job and you want to give us a hand paying the bills, by all means drop by our Patreon page or our VidMe page. Links are provided below as well. But even if you don't, we want to thank you for your time. We do appreciate it and we hope to see you again. Thank you very, very much for watching.